Welcome, everybody. It is January the 18th. This is week 15 since EOS independence. We're continuing the discussion on Antelope resource model. Brian is going to lead that. Before I hand it over to Brian, we can get an update from Stephen on how things are going with Antelope software development side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So primary updates worth mentioning today are that likely before the end of this week or perhaps sometime early next week, we will be performing a patch release against 3.1 and 3.2. I think that'll be 3.1.3 off the top of my head. I'll have to click back in since it's been a while. And then, of course, 3.2.1. Primary thing here is that there are just some ship instability issues. Kudos to Kevin for knocking that out while Brian and I were off site this last week. Thank you for that. And then other big update is that we do anticipate probably a new release of Dune. I would anticipate probably early next week, and I think that one will be V1.1. Big take home there is just it will be better at managing different versions of the other pieces of software that it's dependent upon. So instead of being hard-coded values for the most recent release versions of things like CDT and Leap, it will instead be much more pliable on that front. So that's the main take-home for us, is that we'll have that patch release to fix the ship issues we've been facing inside of Leap, and then we will have a new release of Dune upcoming as well.
Sweet. Any questions or comments for anyone on those releases?
Can you get an indication about how many people are using Dune? Is there like any kind of download metric? I'm just personally interested.
That's a great question. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I am happy to take that as an action item and surface it for everybody. I'm happy to report back there. And that actually reminds me of one other update completely unrelated to all of this, but just something that we have been tracking in our notes previously, is that there had been some discussion around further documentation around all of the crypto extensions in terms of what had been supported historically via CDT and kind of what the breadth had expanded to now. Our teammate Lynn has wrapped up documentation there. I think it's just pending one more review before we publish and socialize that everywhere. But that's just some more supporting documentation that'll be released in time.
Yeah. And have you guys gotten any feedback from developers using Dune that it's kind of meeting the need that we were addressing with when Mac support, for example, was removed natively?
Yeah,
our
Mac developers, the same.
Yeah, are Mac developers happy with the alternative? I've heard feedback from within my team that not so much, that there is some pain being experienced by the Mac developers, but wondering if you guys are hearing anything on your side.
So absolutely, in terms of like our repo, we have gotten feedback around Mac support issues. I unfortunately am not well equipped with some of the latest updates, but anecdotally, it did come up in a meeting yesterday that Mikal, one of our teammates who's been primarily focused on Dune, has introduced a few resolutions to issues related to Mac. I apologize that I don't have specific details here, but that's another thing I'm happy to bring to the next update. And of course, we'll be performing that release. I'll be working on the release notes also during that span of time, so I'll be able to speak more intelligently about it than I am today. But I do know that there are some of the Mac issues that have been addressed in this latest Dune release. I've just not had a chance to sync directly with Mikal yet.
Great. Does anyone have anything to add, feedback to share while we're here? Almost more of a developer thing than a node operator thing, but
like for a question, like if you can run Docker in macOS, right? I don't know. I don't use it for that kind of thing, but if you can, then you can just run Dune on your flashy new M1 MacBook Pro. It's more like a question, like, can you?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think anecdotally, most of like the feedback that we had received were for older computers that were running on Mac OS.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that Dune, that's where people would want to use it, right? If they can't compile the software to run using their M1 CPU on their macOS, they would just use Docker. But I don't know how well Docker works on a Mac.
I think Docker does work with M1 and x86. I think Bucky's got both of those working.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Danny, do you want to maybe briefly talk about your use case and your experience? I think you're one of the people I've heard from that. Putting you on the spot now here.
No, it's okay. So I don't use Dune just because it does complicate things, like going through Docker and trying to, kind of handling the file system. And also Dune has sort of like different syntax than the typical CDT. So if you're familiar with the CDT, just use the CDT. We don't need to kind of use another step. So I just personally don't use Dune at all, but I've been able to compile the CDT on my Mac. So I'm just been kind of using the CDT natively. The only issue is I have to compile it myself because there's no binaries built in. So a lot of the Mac users, typically it's like brew install CDT, and then if that's not available, they don't install it because they're not going and compiling the sort of C++ code to build their binaries. But I've been able to succeed to actually build it, and I just use that like natively using Docker with the file system, and kind of like it's just a little bit more of a headache. And I just don't personally like to use Docker to compile like for a CDT.
Okay. So it's Mac is not officially supported, but it sounds like it does work, and there's just no binary. So there's a little extra effort required from Mac developers. If they want to use it, they have to compile it themselves.
Yeah, they need to have like, the latest Xcode. There's a few like requirements to get it. So usually the developers will just not install it at all. And they'll just actually be blocked. Like they just won't use it. And then they'll have to figure out how to compile, a smart contract. And I just point them to another compiler, which is the Vert, which is like it comes with a pre-built binary. But again, it's always nicer to use the native CDT. So I use both. I use two different compilers. Depends on the mood, I guess. But I don't use Dune, so that's just
hardcore developers would buy a brand new Mac and install Linux. Boom.
No, they would compile. They would still the hardcore ones would just compile their own binaries and stuff, and so at least that works. Before it didn't work, but now it works. So there's no issues with the compiling the CDT. It's just an extra step that usually most developers don't do.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for that feedback, Denis. And I know I've been meaning to get some time on the calendar with you to talk about your developer experience. And there's something maybe we can double click on a little bit and get some more fleshed out details.
Yeah, for sure. And I've actually gone one step further as well. Sometimes I've started using GitHub Actions to do the builds, so that you don't even need to even have the CDT compiled on your own computer. You just set up a GitHub Actions that will compile and publish the binaries to your GitHub releases. So you just publish a new tag on your GitHub repo, and it will compile and deploy your smart contracts directly into your release. So technically, you don't even need a CDT if you use GitHub Actions, and then let GitHub in Ubuntu do the compiling and stuff like that. So I've actually not even needed to have the CDT anymore, which is just another. But that might be the more hardcore, but it's the lazy hardcore. It's not even have CDT. That's my feedback.
Cool.
That's fascinating insight. Yeah. That'll be really helpful too, to understand the ways in which people are using things differently than our assumptions.
Yes.
I can give a little bit of feedback similar to Dennis. I already have like scripts and CDT and everything set up, so I'm not using Dune. But one of the reasons that I didn't want to use Dune was because my previous Mac only had 8 gigs of RAM, and Docker tends to eat a lot of RAM. So when I did things with Docker, I had to like turn everything off other than Docker and my code editor. And the same things that Dennis said, like it just adds some extra complexity dealing with the virtual file system and things like that. So if it's possible to precompile those native binaries, make it more convenient for people to work directly with a CDT. I think that's always good.
No, that's excellent feedback. And maybe one thing that I'll tease here is that there have been some early discussions around setting up some form of a roundtable for developers specifically. We found a really nice niche here. It's actually excellent to see a number of new names, at least not necessarily faces, on this call today. It means that Brian's doing the right things here to get you guys in here and engaging with him. I think that we will be looking to introduce some sort of forum at that capacity. Still working with Nathan to decide whether what he's envisioned is a little bit more like thought leadership and discussion versus really like this more like inbound collection of requirements and understanding very specific user needs to the software that we're supporting. But that is an update that I hope to provide in the coming weeks.
All right. Any final thoughts before we move on to Antelope resource model? All right, Brian, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel. Stephen, thanks for the kudos. I won't take the credit, though. I think the credit goes to Daniel and
also everyone else on this call.
Who've consistently participated, and but it is nice to see some additional folks here that I haven't seen before. Before we get into a couple of housekeeping items, and one of them was about exactly that. I was curious, for the folks who don't consistently join, if you could share quickly what inspired you to join today, just so that we have some learnings on how to increase engagement.
Ross said I should be here, and here am I.
Great.
Attaboy, Ross. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm writing a summary for EOS support.
Okay. You said Rio support? Did I hear that right? No, I didn't hear that right.
EOS support.
Oh, EOS support. Gotcha.
Yes, I invite you to reach out to me to doing some work on writing content for EOS support. So happy to have you here. The more we can spread this stuff, the better.
Excellent. How about you, Patrick? I look at some of the reports that you and Aloha provide to the community pretty consistently, so it's nice to see you here. What brings you in?
If I'm awake and available at this hour, then I certainly join. But this time usually conflicts with stuff, so that's why I don't join more often.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And I see we have a WAX, representative here as well. WAX often comes up as a example when we're discussing things, as it has some unique characteristics and usage. I don't know how to pronounce your username there. Is it Rakiden?
Yes, hi. Exactly, it's Rakiden.
Rakiden. Okay. So what brought you in today?
I'm trying to follow up on progress we are having on Antelope, since all of this will convert to WAX in the near future. And there's many people involved which are on this call right now. Yeah, just trying to follow up on where we're heading and what status quo is.
Excellent. Did I miss
Rakiden's he's also an OIG in the WAX network.
Okay.
Yeah, let me mention that we have blockchain governance elections going on over at WAX, OIG elections. I'm running for that too, as I have been part of the OIG in the past 18 months. And let me tell you, I can need any support I can get these days. We are seeing huge talent interested in blockchain governance in WAX. Very engaging and vital discussions happening in the broader picture of community. So there's a lot happening. You should definitely make sure to join the public groups and get some of that feedback that we get over and over from the community in regards of our tooling. if I can help you with that, let me know. I'm always happy to discuss wax matters and Antelope matters, and I'll do my best to join the Antelope or ENF roundtable here, and probably also funnel some of our thoughts over at Wax into here.
Excellent. Yeah,
You'll find whenever we have conversations about massive usage of infrastructure, Wax is always the first network we talk about.
Yeah, especially the last few calls with this Antelope resource model discussion. It's been a key driver that's, I guess, prompted that discussion to start, I think. So awesome to have more representation from Wax joining these calls. So yeah, thank you for joining, and good luck with the election.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'll through one of those public groups, I'll see if I can find you and reach out so that we can discuss a little further. So for the new folks, just a quick introduction. You might not know who I am. So I'm a senior product manager at ENF, focusing on block producers or node operators is sort of one of my key areas of focus. So that's why I'm on these calls. That's why I want to learn from you folks, the sort of the way you're doing things, kind of, as I mentioned with Denis's point, from a developer perspective, I want to get insights into those things that are different than our assumptions. Like there's best laid plans, and then there's rubber hits the road, right? And you guys definitely interface with that rubber a lot more than we do. So I appreciate your engagement in these sorts of calls so that we can learn, through direct questions and also just from listening in on your conversations together. So just a heads up, I will be out of town for next week's call. I'll coordinate with Daniel about sort of expectations for next week's call, and we'll go from there. Okay, so as far as what I wanted to cover today, so there's 3 potential things. So first, I want to just give a quick status update on the resource model discussions. And then I wanted to, we're kind of low on a backlog of agenda items. So I wanted to do a quick sort of topic brainstorm sort of gathering so that I have a list, sort of a backlog of things we can cover. And then one topic that would be great to get into today is, I know Aaron expressed an idea last week about read-only Node-EOS instances, and it looks like Aaron is here. So if he's still around when we get to that, I'd love to get into that topic and get an overview of that. All right, so quick update here. Oops. Daniel, is it easy for you to allow me to share my screen?
Shouldn't be a problem. Good to go.
Cool. Let's see, where is the right window? Here it is. Okay, so this isn't a super exciting visual aid. It's a table of contents. But so basically, the our conversations over the last 2 sessions of this, I guess 3. No, it was the last 2. I was on the last one for most of the call. Yeah, so our conversations about in the last 2 sessions of this have focused around resource model pain points from a node operator perspective. Basically the information I gathered through those conversations have become this doc that is a target audience of internal ENF developers, basically to go into the gory details of the pain points that node operators are experiencing, and then some potential scope for us to address. I want to start with the caveat that this is not a commitment to delivering the user stories that I'm going to list here at this stage. It's just to sort of show the scope that we've identified through those conversations. And, I'm going to talk about the next steps before I even go through what's in here. Next steps are going to include sort of Determining how these proposed changes would play with other related changes that we have in the pipeline that kind of are in a same space, right? It would touch similar parts of the system, both by the ENF grant recipients, RFP I guess winners, we'll say, to make sure that we're kind of all moving in the same direction. We'll of course select which of these initiatives we'll actually do. We'll prioritize it against other initiatives, and then organize it into target releases, do the technical design and work breakdown. So those are the next steps. But first, and again, I'm only really going to show the table of contents because it's really just the bullet list piece that I want to discuss, and I want to make this quick. So the pain points we discussed were, sort of RAM scalability, if you will, ease of use of the resource model, and the impact to service nodes of the resource model, and sort of how Node-EOS, what information Node-EOS makes available to service nodes when things go awry. And from that, these are some of the items that we discussed. One of these is going to sound like a new thing that we didn't discuss, and that's because I had discussed it kind of offline with Denis in a separate conversation. So if it seems that it comes out of left field, that's where it came from. So first, it seemed like the biggest sort of point is billing for failed transactions as a means of at a chain level preventing sort of spamming through failed transactions. Next is enabling off-chain abuse prevention for service nodes. We talked about basically Node-EOS providing better, more complete information like failure traces and better response codes, and not using 500s, which I think that change may have already been made, but yeah, so just things that will enable off-chain at the proxy level, easier and more accurate abuse prevention. We talked about, as an ease of use sort of mitigation, combining the net and CPU resources. And then a state scaling strategy. So this is basically, this is a larger item. It's more about design, or sort of thinking ahead for how might we enable cost-effective increases to the total available storage on a Antelope chain, right? And so that one's a big sort of undefined thing. It's more the architecture sort of piece rather than an implementation. Think of this as, make a blue paper type of conversation. Lowering RAM cost reduction as a short-term mitigation for some of these issues. So this is really the ability to lower RAM cost reduction, right? And then finally, on-chain resources table. So I guess the title of this should be smart contract access to information about account resource usage and availability. So that that's pretty much what I wanted to do with this status update is show you what those conversations turned into. This document is sort of being reviewed internally and will lead to some conversations internally that we'll use to determine what we can take on and on what sort of time horizon. Any questions before we move into the next stuff? Excellent. Cool. So thanks again for everybody who participated in those conversations. Obviously very helpful to get your perspective and the things that are, causing you trouble today so that we can, know what we need to address. All right. So the next thing is, as I said, we are sort of light on sort of the backlog of topics to address in these calls, but I know there's plenty that we could address in these calls. So I wanted to do, a few minutes of sort of open floor to, to get people's thoughts on the sorts of things that they'd like to discuss here. Again, just a high level overview of the intention of this is it's really mainly an opportunity for node operators to, discuss together, strategies that they have to make their node operations more smooth, or pain points they've run into, that sort of stuff. And then secondarily, but very important for me, it's also an opportunity for ENF, myself specifically, to benefit from hearing those conversations and turn that into future deliverables for Antelope Leap and other Antelope technologies. So with that, open floor. What topics would you folks like to see discussed in future calls? I'm gonna start doing the teacher thing and calling on people. Wow, Ross turned on his camera. Here we go.
This is the moment where everyone says, "Oh man, if Michael from USA was here, he would be talking hind legs off donkeys about all sorts of things that had occurred this week."
Yeah.
Well, today I just had some challenges with peering, and I know we've spoken about it before already, about your peer list are dead, or it rotates slowly through the peer list. There isn't any kind of state of which peers there are low latency or good performance. I don't know if there's any update from that, hey Kev. Like, I know that you obviously you cottoned on to that. I know that you had some ideas that you were going to discuss with the team, because it's a little bit of a mission, whenever you want to go. And I mean, my first stop would be going to your tool, Matthew, your EOS Nation tool, and seeing who's actually live still. And you just grab some of them of people that and you put them in, and maybe they're a little bit slow, and then it starts at the top and slowly walks its way through. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
any plans, Kev?
Would love to work that issue. It's certainly a pain point in an area that could be improved. That, or just everyone uses EOS Nation as their only peer. So, but
They're massive like that.
We've got someone on our team who's basically, that's his full-time job, like dealing with peering.
Yes, honestly.
Yeah, I get pinged by, he pings me every once in a while. It's cool.
Yeah, but it's a lot of work.
But the validator tool grabs everything from everybody's JSON and then puts it into a nice little text that you can just copy and paste straight into your config.ini. So at least you know that whoever you're connecting to, whenever the tool ran, did get appropriate responses. But even if you've got 10 good guys, it doesn't always mean that you're going to be getting the right guy at the right time, because somebody could go down and then it sort of hangs there for a bit and gets a bit confused. And I'm talking about this. This is not from how you get your back end block production mesh going. This is more from you just want to spin up a node and get some things going. It's quite manual, so it can be a little bit challenging, and I'm sure it's challenging for newcomers to the space.
Yeah, and the default is terrible there as well. 100 blocks at a time is just not a good default. I think most people know to change that to at least 1,000, but maybe a lot of people don't, and so that just increases the pain.
All right. So just as a sort of facilitation strategy here, I'm gonna cut off there. I wrote down that topic and some of the context we just discussed, but my intention right now isn't to get too deep on any given topic or get into solutioning, more just to identify potential topics. So, Denis turned on his camera. He might have something to say.
Yeah, just for topics, no solutions. It's just to talk about that single resource sort of model that we would kind of model, like kind of merged net and CPU and have maybe that one single resource model. So I think that's a discussion. I have no idea what the solution would be, but I'm sure we can have a good discussion on that. And the other thing too is just figuring out how we can kind of get, the chain a bit more usable and kind of like what the chain has used and built with Anchor and the EOS Power Up, and try to maybe build more native solutions that instead of trying to have third-party providers bake in that missing gap, there's probably some help with having the chain itself provide some of these resource helpers, I guess you can say. So we have an opportunity right now that the GrayMass team is working on WRF-Kit and better integration with wallets. So I think this would be a good opportunity to kind of really get the feedback from GrayMass to say what if we're going to be shifting, like if EOS and Antelope is shifting towards more of a different wallet integration, that's also the opportunity for the chain to adapt and maybe improve a few things. So I'm sure that, let's see if Aaron is here. I'm sure GrayMass has lots of suggestions and lines up with, how to improve the resource model as a wallet provider and the native chain. Because right now, a lot of these toolings, GrayMass has to kind of provide it on the side. And I think, better wallet integration with the resources, maybe an improvements on Power Up or a single one-shot transaction. Who knows? But that would
Power Up. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Power Up tool from Void is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the it's not that complicated. You're just like, hey, I have this account. Just make sure that has resources for the next, 14, 30 days or so. So a lot of the use cases are actually pretty simple, but we have to use third-party tools because I can't use it with the native tools. And Void, I think a day or two, Power Up was down and everybody was panicking. How do I do something? Like literally, I don't know how. If Void goes
when
down,
when Power Up is down, the number one most common reason is because it needs a power up. And because Power Up is powering up Power Up, we have a problem sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's definitely some improvements. I think Power Up was a solution to kind of reduce the spam on the EOS chain. Wax kept their staking model, but it kind of needs a bit more extra help to help even those service providers service their own resources. But
in my opinion, a very easy win would be some kind of a service that listens to incoming transactions on an endpoint and can trigger a Power Up either on the wallet side or from the API provider side. For example, EOS Nation could run this as a service. Maybe you deposit into some EOS Nation account, and then when you push a transaction in Anchor to EOS Nation node, it checks your account to see if you have CPU, and it'll trigger Power Up before it pushes that action on chain to help ensure it. And this would be better than my current system, which people are using, where it doesn't know if you need to send a transaction. It just knows if your CPU has gone down and it'll power you up, which is great for servers or dApps where they have a consistent usage. But for regular users, it's not really intended for users that might use their account a few times a week, for example, because you'll just get Power Ups every single day, irregardless, because it doesn't know right? So that's something that would be an easy win. And then like Anchor has like the co-signing built in, but that doesn't work with every application. It fails sometimes for various reasons. So I still think we need some kind of an auto power up built into the API endpoint as a fallback, in my opinion. And that would solve like 90% of people's issues.
I don't think we put that on the server. We put that in the client.
The logic is in the
I know, but we got to have it today. You know, if we have something today that people could just type into Anchor and it would solve this problem, right? That would be huge.
We're probably going to have the new client SDKs before this ever got implemented in a server, though.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, but I have a lot of thoughts here, and we can take a lot of those offline. But to kind of go back to what Denny was saying, like we're developing the client side stuff right now, and we've also built a server side implementation to listen to that client side implementation, but it's just something that we built. It's not fully fleshed out. So we could really use the server side implementation to be native to that co-signing process. So that way any node operator could run this. Maybe the protocol is iterated on, how it goes back and forth could be improved upon with external eyeballs. And that, I'm specifically talking about co-signing at this point. We could have that baked in, so that way it's just something that API operators could turn on. And client side, you could just say, get supported APIs against whatever API you're using, and it would tell you if that's available. And it could handle resources in that manner. As far as PowerUp goes, there can be client-side plugins that can test the transaction using the compute transaction model and automatically append a PowerUp action before the user even sees the action. So we can kind of, if we want users to go directly to PowerUp, like client-side, we can make that happen. Mm-hmm. I could probably hammer out a plugin for that pretty quick.
So I'm going to jump in again,
Sure.
Sort of facilitation thing to keep moving. I took notes on that context so that I can sort of start a follow-up conversation on that warm, if that makes sense, right? I do want to move into the read-only Node EOS instances thing by 9:45 Eastern. So we've got about 3 minutes left to document any other topics that we would want to get on the backlog. Anyone else?
I can throw some out real quick.
Excellent.
The resource payer thing that was in 2.1, that is not in Leap right now. That would be nice to have, to not append no-op actions. If we could raise a discussion around that. Going back to the peer-to-peer stuff, if it would be nice to have a method to guarantee connectivity between two servers. Something like the peer key, just to kind of try to illustrate what I'm talking about, where like we have public peer-to-peer nodes and they're full. But if I could specify a key on one of our internal nodes, and then it could guarantee a connection that could go over that limit, that would help us connect to our public nodes, and maybe even trusted other people. I know the peer key exists, but it doesn't do exactly that. So topic there. I had one more, but I don't remember it. So if that comes up, I'll leave a message.
While you're not remembering it, on the method to guarantee connectivity between peers, could you briefly summarize the crux of the problem, because I didn't quite grasp it. So.
Operator is running public peer-to-peer nodes, and they're publishing it, like the validator's picking it up and everybody's connecting to it. It gets full, and then your internal connectivity, like your other peers, like let's say you have 10 public peer-to-peer nodes. If they're all full, they can't connect to each other. So if they all had a key specified that allowed a guaranteed connection between all 10, then you could create your own kind of private mesh while still allowing public connectivity.
So it's kind of like preferred peers or something like that, right?
That is another good idea for situations where you have a BP and you always want to use peer 1 and 2, but you want to be able to specify peer 3 and 4, but not use them unless peer 1 and 2 are down. Like that would also be another really cool feature.
I didn't know that the public key, the shared key thing gave a priority. I thought it was just like an authentication. Oh, okay. All right.
It would be cool if it did. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like the what is it, MX record priority stuff or something in email. Okay.
So it could be simple as. Sorry.
What was the first thing you mentioned, Aaron, that was in 2.1, but not in 3.1?
Resource payer?
Yeah, the resource payer, like it was the protocol feature you can enable that would then kind of override the only bill first authorizer feature.
Oh, right. Yes. Forgot about that. Yep. Okay.
It kind of lets you pull it out of the transaction traces and still cover the cost of a resource or a transaction.
One more I want to sneak in before we get to the next topic is the contract error handling on other contracts. So one of the things that we're noticing is that we interact with other smart contracts, and whenever there's an error, usually it's an error that's very not explicit and we have no idea what it is, and we don't know which contract is causing that error. And like even just knowing the contract account and the contract name, like the action name, to know where did it come from, because sometimes we have like error with no messaging and we have no idea where it's coming from, and it's extremely hard to troubleshoot, especially if you're working with third parties and stuff like that. So I think that's something that would be helpful. Like just
Brian, along with those notes, just indicate like Matt's already had this idea of like a backtrace, which would be actually really simple, that we could just throw into the trace when something like that happens and point right to where you want to be and provide context. So it's, I think, an easy win.
Yeah, cool. Easy one.
Excellent.
Great.
All right, so kicking into the topic of read-only Node.js instances, Aaron, so I dropped about 15 minutes early on last week's call, and I guess in that time, Aaron introduced this topic as an idea. That's all of the context I have at this point. So with that, Aaron, can you take us away on read-only Node.js instances?
Sure. I think it was in Steam, just to give some background, there was a flag you could set when launching an instance of the server that was read-only. And it would prevent essentially the node from syncing from the network and like doing all the block processing and whatever, but it made that process serve as purely a read-only node to the state. We may have some of that similarity right now with how threading works in some of the processes. But we still have in our operations some servers that run many Node.js instances and each need their own state file. Many of those Node.js instances don't. So as a topic of conversation, and I don't intimately know the architecture of Leap, so I may be making some naive assumptions here. There would be some use if it was possible to spin up a Node.js instance and it was read-only. It provided all of the read capabilities of Node.js without any of like the syncing capabilities, essentially, as well as push transaction. Like that wouldn't work. But then that process alone, like, you know, it with its full utilization available, would be able to serve any reading queries like get tables or get accounts or anything like that, which would then alleviate pressure off of the nodes that are actually syncing and writing. So this would create a scenario where I could have one server that is running one full being a terrible term for this because full node means a million other things. One node that is syncing and then multiple read-only processes. And then through the proxy layer, we would direct certain read queries to those read-only nodes, just to purely reduce pressure on the node that's actually doing the syncing and the writing.
So some naive questions to help me fully grok this. if you're not syncing, what are you doing instead so that your read queries are still reading from an up-to-date state?
You're reading from the state file
of another
running process.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's kind of like a read-only lock on a database as opposed to one that could write.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how Antelope's database processes work exactly, so I don't even know if that's possible, but we've seen and used other implementations of this kind of architecture before. And as we were talking about scaling concerns last week, that was one idea that came to mind. So I figured I would bring it up as maybe this is a good option or a possibility, or maybe it leads to other thoughts about how to reduce pressure. Because I know there's a lot of API operators that run, dozens of instances and each need their own state file. But at the proxy layer, what we're doing is we're directing like push transaction, send transaction, and those calls to a specific set of nodes. And then we're pushing the reading queries to another set of nodes. And like we're routing traffic to specific nodes for specific purposes. So it'd be cool if specific nodes could just serve specific purposes and like optimize for that strategy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Can I also add, I brought this up before, but it belongs in this context, is blocks only relay nodes don't even need any state or very little state just to validate that the block is valid. So it needs some little bit of state. And then you can transmit blocks fast without worrying about any transactions or any big state file or whatever. So we could improve the peer-to-peer network block propagation somehow. Again, I don't know how to architect that, but logically, you should be able to do something like that.
That would be awesome too. And if it were possible with transaction relays to do the same thing, which I bet you it's not, that would be awesome too. Just because reducing the system requirements of dedicated types of peers would then let us have more peers.
Right, exactly.
I can't have a bunch of wax peers because they all take 100 gigs of RAM.
Yeah. Well, if we could reduce the RAM requirements, which was Brian's other thing that he went through the list, that would also help. Yeah.
Two different approaches to that. One being let's make RAM more feasible. The other being let's make it so the purpose of the system doesn't even need the RAM, like on the box.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm hearing that there's a broader topic here as well, which is just allowing for nodes that are dedicated to a specific purpose, right? The one that Matthew brought up is relay nodes, relay only nodes, which don't require state, which we've kind of talked some about in the context of another conversation. And then what Aaron is presenting is read-only Node.js instances that don't sync or push transactions and only like read state from another Node.js instance or process.
And there may be more radical approaches to this that might make more sense. Like if the state itself could be streamed out to something that's accessible by other things. We've had these types of plugins in the past that stream to like a SQL database or something.
Yeah.
But if it could be a data provider that saves state in a way that other consumers can consume state, then we might not even we could have other external services that read that state and serve it out. But that's a big architectural challenge that has been tried and none have stuck.
Yeah, but that idea is like get rid of a bunch of the API things out of Node.js and just create another third-party tool.
Is that like it's like not blockchain?
Well, it's just for reading the state. So this is like I imagine Defuse fits into this, or the graph, or something like that. Yeah. Okay.
And that leads kind of into the big architectural discussion of, do we want Node.js to do everything, or should we enable Node.js to allow other things to take those responsibilities? And there's good debate to be had around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want a collection of microservices or one monolithic service, really?
Mm-hmm.
If every CPU cycle is sacred, Node.js.
Are there arguments for both being simultaneously necessary, or are they kind of like if you do one of those, the other one is not necessary?
I think depends on, if we're looking at, I suppose, smaller blockchains or ease of use for spinning up a new chain and you don't have all these load things, then obviously if you can just keep everything in one binary, then it makes it very easy for someone to get on board. Or are we targeting we're planning to grow Antelope into these massive, huge clusters of, you need hundreds of machines. Well, all of a sudden you want an architecture that, matches that. So I guess that's really the question.
Right. Kevin just shared a couple of GitHub items. Kevin, do you want to mention why you shared those?
They're related to the topics at hand. So the first one is a design document for a current implementation that's in process, which is the implementation of read-only capabilities, multi-threaded. So you can take a look at that and provide feedback if you like, but that's coming. So that's kind of exciting. The second one is an implementation that is just waiting to be merged that will come out in the next major release, which will propagate blocks after header validation, which will greatly improve block propagation. That's actually done even off the main thread so that it's can happen without even interrupting what's currently happening, which anticipating being a huge improvement. There is, we're talking potentially, I think we're talking about this week of releasing patch release of 3.1, which will include this PR, which is about to be merged probably right after this meeting, which is also should help block propagation. So they're just related to the topics that we've been discussing.
Great. Yeah, so just a general call to action. We invite folks to submit issues and comment on issues in the GitHub and generally participate there. And when possible, we'll call out relevant items like this. So here's a couple of relevant pull requests. So okay. Does anybody else have anything to add? Either sort of me too. I would need a read-only Node.js instance, or concerns with that approach.
So I'll just say me too. Aaron's comments.
Yep. Me too.
Excellent. Well, all right. That is what I have for the day. So appreciate everyone's participation.
Thank you very much, Brian. And so for next week, you mentioned you will not be available. Is that right, Brian?
Right. And I'll right after the call,
we can chat offline and decide what we want to do for next week. Sounds good. And I'll keep everyone posted in the chat on whether or not we have an agenda for next week and how we want to treat the call next week. All right. Any final thoughts? Guys. Sounds good. That sounds like we're ready to call it a call. So yeah, keep an eye on the chats. Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome day, and we'll see you next week, possibly, or the week after that if we decide not to carry on. Have a good day, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thanks, you too.